All right, my friends, J.R. Dukes at your service. I appreciate everybody joining me today. I want to welcome everyone, especially all of my free minded friends. Great day, fantastic day at the U.S. Supreme Court, and we're going to get into it very, very shortly. I want to welcome everybody on the X platform. Looks like it's coming through good. If you have any issues hearing me or anything, let me know. Let me just make sure everything's coming through. It looks good, looks good. And hello to Twitch. And of course, welcome to all of my YouTube friends out there. Always a pleasure. Zach is already in the chat. Of course, Zach, by the way, I appreciate the way that you always support the channel. I definitely notice it. It's not something I take for granted. Appreciate you and your cats. I know your cat got on the computer the other day and left a super chat on one of the other videos. I appreciate that, my friend. And I try to always give everybody at least 30-minute, 1 hour notification. I know on YouTube it sometimes does not work out as smoothly as it should, but we keep trying to make sure everybody's informed so we can see what's going on. All right, Dan Sapphire. Great day to be an American. I agree. Thanks for joining us today. All right, let's go ahead and drill right down into it. Now, listen to me on this. No matter what you hear with these talking heads trying to be somewhat composed and reserved and saying things about this case along the lines of, oh, it's a measured approach, it's a decent win, he got immunity for some things. Make no mistake about it. No mistake. This is a huge win for former President Donald Trump. And folks, it's a huge win for our country. It's a huge win for our institution, our constitutional republic, our democracy. I am not an individual that likes to get into hyperbole or try to blow things out of proportion or try to just make something that it's not. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to give you the truth as I see it, and you can make up your own minds. Today is a great day for America. It's a great day for you, for me, for our children, our grandchildren, and the future of our country. Make no mistake about it. This yet again proves what I have been saying for a long time now, that our country is exceptional and truly has the providential care of God. I have no doubt in my mind about that. And as you can see from our founding fathers, once again, the wisdom that they had to put into our Constitution and set up the three distinct co-equal branches of government. And in this particular instance, I'm talking about the United States Supreme Court, is nothing short of amazing. And I'm very, very happy to see what has happened today. What a fantastic day for our country. A quick thing here, if you'd like to join the conversation, it is an open mic again, as always. Just simply click on that link. If you don't want to be on video, no problem. You just simply call in, just turn off the camera icon, and you can ask any questions you want. Alternatively, feel free to put any questions you have in the chat, and I will try to get to each and every question that I possibly can. All right. In relation to this specific case, the president, the presidential office, the co-equal branch of government, the executive branch, by the U.S. Supreme Court has granted the presidency effectively complete and total immunity, aka absolute immunity, for all official acts. Make no mistake about it, I was concerned that they would not come up with that decision. I was kind of thinking they were going to lean towards what we've called qualified immunity. That's what we've been talking about for a while, and it's similar to what the police have. So that's another thing too. When you hear these people trying to create fear, and I got a video I want to show you about that a little later, they are definitely trying to instill fear. I'm talking about these woke Democrats. They're trying to scare you. They're trying to scare the bejesus out of each and every one of us, that now the office of the presidency, if Donald Trump wins, he knows he can get away with anything and everything. That is not correct. But for official acts, it's absolute immunity. Additionally, the Supreme Court ruled essentially for any duty of the president that is in what we would call the outer periphery. That's the language that they use. The president is granted what they called presumptive immunity. Now, presumptive immunity, the way I read it in the documents from the U.S. Supreme Court, is higher than qualified immunity, but just shy of absolute immunity, which again is such a major win for our country, for President Trump, for all of us. And I think that's fantastic. Now, you may think back to Richard Nixon and the Watergate situation. And of course, there's reasonable people that differ on exactly what happened during the Watergate situation. But let's just pretend that a president engaged in an act of something clearly criminal and not related to his office, or his official acts in office, I should say, specifically breaking into the Watergate Hotel to steal information on the upcoming election. Well, clearly, that is something that would not be part of an official duty or on the outer perimeter of a president's duty. I think that's pretty clear, self-explanatory, and it makes sense. And of course, that was the reason President Ford decided that he would go ahead and offer a pardon to Richard Nixon, which of course he accepted. We don't want to see an American president in prison, if at all possible. Of course, I can't say that for the woke Democrats. They're more than happy to put former President Donald Trump in jail. As a matter of fact, coming up on the 11th of this month, the only negative going on for President Trump right now is he has this court date with this unethical, in my opinion, unscrupulous Judge Merchant, where everybody says he's not going to go to jail, but yours truly is telling you right now, I think there's a real good possibility he will end up in jail. I hope I'm wrong. I don't know how you can be convicted of 34 felonies, although we know this is a bogus case. 34 felonies, and at least 9 times the court found you in violation of an unconstitutional gag order, but they found you guilty of it nonetheless, and there's not going to be some type of incarceration. Again, I could be wrong. If you agree or disagree, let me know. Put it in the comments below. I'd like to hear what you think will or will not happen. And let's see. I want to go ahead and let's bring in my friend Sapphire. Let's get a quick reaction from him, and then we will go ahead and I want to take a look at the first video that we have. But again, a great day for our president here. All right, Sapphire, how we doing today, my friend?
I'm doing good. This is a great day to be an American.
Amen. Every day is a great day to be an American, but today feels especially sweet. Well, don't you think so?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Part of the ruling says that Trump's conversations with his DOJ are off limits.
Exactly. We're going to get into that here in just a minute. We're going to actually, I'm not going to read each and every word on the papers, but I do want to drill down into it, and I want to examine it. I think there's some really interesting points that we should look at. This particular ruling was a split decision, clearly split along party lines 6-3. You had obviously the 6 conservatives essentially acting as one unit and voting to uphold the office of the presidency, and then you had the 3 liberal justices voting the other way, which is unfortunate. I wish they could have spoke with one voice, but that simply was not what was not to be the case. So it is what it is. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at this first video that I got for us today, and then we're going to start drilling into some of this paperwork here. So let's listen to this real quick.
On to the timing of all of this. President Trump has given a statement to Fox News Digital in the wake of this decision. I'll read it for you here, and Jonathan Turley, get your take on it, the other side. Former President Trump said, "I have been harassed by the Democrat Party, Joe Biden, Obama, and their thugs, fascists, and communists for years. And now the courts have spoken. This is a big win for our Constitution and for democracy. Now I am free to campaign like anyone else. We are leading in every poll by a lot, and we will make America great again." So that's his take. Although I mentioned earlier, there's another date on the calendar. This is his July 11th sentencing in New York. And I agree, Jonathan, with him when he says, "I'm free to campaign like anyone else." Will that be true at the end of the day on July 11th as well?
Now, of course, that's President Trump's reaction to this verdict. Obviously, he's elated. And then, of course, we're going to briefly listen to Jonathan Turley make some comments about this.
Well,
I would hope that the judge in New York would not impose a jail sentence, because I don't think it's warranted under New York law. But this case is not over. Jack Smith is not going to go quietly into that night. I want to know 2 other aspects of this opinion to complete this circle. The court deals with the so-called fake electors issue. And it says, look, that question in dealing with state officials is not something that we see as falling within these core areas. And so the district court's going to have to look at those communications to determine to what extent there is this immunity presumptive or not, that might apply. But then it also talks about President Trump's January 6th speech and all of his tweets. And the language there seems quite favorable towards President Trump and says that presidents are expected to speak forcibly on issues. Forcefully on issues that are important to citizens. And it really puts a emphasis on the fact that this is something that presidents do. Many of us believe, certainly I do, that President Trump's speech was entirely protected under the First Amendment.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we can discuss pertaining to that actual speech, the January 6th, let's call it the so-called January 6th nonsense. There are the First Amendment issues that go along with that. And I believe that Amy Coney Barrett or whatever, that particular justice, did not think that it would fit into this court's parameters as far as being part of his official duties. But the rest of the justices, at least the conservative justice, disagreed with her. And again, we're going to take a look at that shortly. I don't want to read each and every word on this because frankly, it's just too long to do so. However, it is important that we take a look and we see exactly what the justices said in their entirety, because I think it's quite striking and it is very broad. And it's clearly that they wanted to protect the office of the presidency today. And I just think that is just absolutely fantastic. Any comment on that, Separ?
I think that it's great that they drilled down and said, these things are protected. And that there's some things that aren't, then turned around and said his conversations with the DOJ are off limits. So that's really...
Yeah, I think that was in there too, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's really going to hamstring Judge Chutkan, who said there was no such thing as immunity, which is crazy.
Yes, absolutely. That Judge Chutkan, obviously this is really bad news for Jack Smith. I'm sure that Jack Smith may be having some kind of cardiac issue right now, would be my guess. I know as of it went on air, I did not hear any comment that his office has released other than they don't have any comment at this time. But I've been saying this for a while, and I'm going to repeat it again. It may go back to the lower courts because that's what the Supreme Court said, but they may fight and try to puff and moan about this whole situation. But in reality, these cases are over. These cases are dead. They're gutted. They are basically just a zombie of a case walking. There's no heart in it. I mean, there's no there is essentially what I'm saying. Now, Jack Smith is not the kind of person that is just going to give up and roll over. I'm certain he's going to continue to find some way to fight, and that Judge Chutkan clearly is a pro-Democrat type of woke judge. And I'm sure she's going to try to fight it as much as she can too. But I would say that their hands are pretty well tied, and we'll just have to see exactly what transpires when it does go back down to the lower courts. Any comment on that?
I agree 100%.
All right, let's take a look at this real quick, and then we're going to drill down in this document. Anybody has any questions, again, please put them in the comments there. I have right here the actual opinion from the U.S. Supreme Court that was handed down today. I was definitely waiting by my computer patiently at 10 o'clock Eastern time this morning, waiting for the decision to come down. And, of course, here are the justices of the U.S. Supreme Court. I put these in the order, at least by my guesstimation, as to where they would fall in the political spectrum from left to right. And you can see on the left here, you have Sotomayor, you have that new Jackson and Kagan. And then, of course, you have what's considered the conservatives over here. The Chief Justice, John Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, they're kind of definitely central is about the best way to say it. Remember the other day, Amy Coney Barrett actually changed places with Judge Jackson in one of the rulings, which was rather surprising. And then all the way over here on the right-hand side, you have justice that's been on there for a very long time, Clarence Thomas. And he's a fantastic justice. But again, I don't want to get off on that too much and digress for that. Let's go ahead and take a look at this opinion here. Let me put this on a separate screen, and we'll take a look at it together, because it's clear that the Supreme Court, they can say whatever they want to say as far as, hey, we try to split middle ground. We try to be I don't know. We tried to reach compromise. There is no compromise here. The Supreme Court justices knew clearly that this was of extremely important. And as Justice Alito said, they're writing a rule for the ages. And they definitely acted accordingly, especially if you look at what they actually came up with. I think it's pretty striking. So if you have any comment on that, just let me know, Sapphire, and we'll deter to you on that. So here is the actual Supreme Court decision that was handed down. Let me make sure I blow this up as much as possible so that we can all take a look at this together. Okay, let's try this for a minute. All right. Again, we're not going to read each and every one of these pages. I believe it's 100 and some odd pages long, so we're not going to be doing that. But this is the ruling that was handed down. I guess it was about 10:30, 10:40 this morning. All right, Supreme Court of the United States. Of course, we have Trump Donald Trump versus the United States. Quick recap: this case stemmed from the case out of D.C. pertaining to the January 6th nonsense. So that's when he started this situation of appealing it, and luckily the Supreme Court decided to take it. And I think it's I think they did a good job on it. Did you have time to read it yourself, Sapphire, or did you? Have you been listening to some of the political heads? You were telling me something on text earlier.
Robert Gouveia from Watching the Watchers. He went over this line by line when it first came out, and I watched his commentary, and it was very spot on. He does some really good in-depth stuff on this kind of stuff.
Was he of the opinion too, like me, that this is definitely a fantastic opinion that's come out as far as Donald Trump is concerned? All right, let's go ahead and take a quick look at this.
He was reading where it said that his conversations with the DOJ are off limits. He said, boom, yes.
Yeah, I agree totally. All right, let's start into this. You have, and remember, this is Chief Justice Roberts writing this opinion. A federal grand jury indicted former President Donald J. Trump on 4 counts for conduct that occurred during his presidency following the November 2020 election. The indictment alleges that after losing the election, Trump conspired to overturn it and spread knowingly false claims of election fraud to obstruct the collecting, counting, and certifying of the election results. Trump moved to dismiss the indictment based on presidential immunity. And remember, up until now, there has never been a former president of the United States brought up on criminal charges like this, especially relating to official acts he did while he was president of the United States, arguing that a president has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions performed within the outer perimeter of his official responsibilities, and that the indictment, let me sure I get my place here, and that the indictment allegations fell within the core of his official duties. The district court, and we're talking about Judge Chicken there, the district court denied Trump's motion to dismiss, holding that the former presidents do not possess federal criminal immunity for any act. So they were on the extreme end. I mean, you could argue Donald Trump was on one side, extreme, saying total immunity for everything, which I happen to agree with. And of course, the DC court being a liberal court, and this judge was I believe she was put on the bench by a Democrat. It may have been Barack Obama, but I can't swear that. I know she was put on there by a Democrat. Let's just let it go at that. They were on the other complete side of this, saying a president doesn't have immunity for anything, which of course is obscene. It says both the district court and the DC circuit declined to decide whether the indicted conduct involved official acts. Now, here is the actual holding. This is the meat of the entire decision right here. Held under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of the presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity. So when you hear these pundits on TV saying, oh, they didn't give absolute immunity, that's not true. That's not true. Now, they didn't give absolute immunity for unofficial acts, but they did grant absolute immunity. Under our constitutional structure, let me read this and I'll defer to you, Sapphire. Under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive. It's kind of hard to read when it's split up like that. Preclusive constitutional authority. Now we can dive into the definition of conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority, but essentially it's the acts of the president. And he is entitled to at least what they have called presumptive immunity, again, higher than qualified, lower than total immunity, presumptive immunity from prosecution for all of his official acts. There is no immunity for unofficial acts. And of course, that's pretty well common sense. Sapphire, go ahead.
It's like you have a hula hoop around you. Anything that is within that scope is considered a presidential act and is immune from prosecution.
I would say that's a good way to put it. All right. This case is the first criminal prosecution in our nation's history of a former president for actions taken during his presidency. That's very true. We just talked about that. Determining whether and under what circumstances such a prosecution may proceed requires careful assessment of the scope of presidential power under the Constitution. The nature of that power requires that a former president must have some immunity for criminal prosecution, some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure in office. This is the findings of the U.S. Supreme Court, right? At least with respect to the president's exercise of his core constitutional powers. This immunity must be absolute. As for his remaining official acts, he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity. Booyah, there you go. Yeah. Right there. That's fantastic. So what does that mean? What this means is if it is part of the president's official acts, the Supreme Court has said the president has absolute immunity. Absolute means exactly what it says. 100% total, complete immunity. And then for the remaining acts out, they're just kind of on the fringe, so to speak, of what he does or she does as president of the United States, he has presumptive immunity. And what's good about that, as we read further, you're going to see parts in here where the Supreme Court made it very clear. You cannot go effectively into the president's brain to decide as to whether or not what his intentions were. That's very important because otherwise that could be litigated to the nth degree on something like that. So let me see if I got any questions on this real quick here. Zach, first-time offenders, especially for nonviolent crimes, are usually not sentenced to prison or jail. Exactly. And one other thing while we're on that subject, folks, if you start hearing your woke Democratic friends start screaming that no one's above the law, this is unprecedented, this is ridiculous, just remember this. This is the Supreme Court saying with one voice, we are tired of this lawfare already, and we're not going to allow it. And when they tell you, oh, this is unprecedented, this is something that's never happened before, I want you to remember what we talked about in a previous video. That is, judges have absolute immunity. Legislators have absolute immunity. Many elected officials have absolute immunity. Police have qualified immunity. So to say it is something that is unique, unprecedented, is just simply not based in reality. All right. This goes on. Article 2 of the Constitution vests executive power in a president of the United States of America. The president has duties of unrivaled gravity and breadth. That was their finding in Trump versus Vance was another case. I believe it was just a few years ago. His authority to, and that, by the way, that case had to do with whether a president had to turn over evidence. And in this ruling, the Supreme Court clearly made a differentiation between whether a president could be compelled to turn over evidential immunity. I think that's probably the best way to explain it. Can a president be required to turn over evidential information, which in Vance, they said the president would have to turn over records if it's required from a court. At least a former president would have to turn over those records. But in this particular case right here, they're referencing it for this other reason. In the latter case, the president's authority is sometimes conclusive and preclusive, which means, I'm just going to put my spin on this. Conclusive means final and it's unchecked, unquestioned, period. All right, when the president exercises such authority, Congress cannot act on and the courts cannot examine the president's actions. I mean, tell me how this is not a win for former President Donald Trump. How's that not a win for all of us as Americans? How's this not a win for our country and specifically the office of the president? I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It follows that an act of Congress, either a specific one targeted at the president or a general applicable one, may not criminalize the president's actions within his exclusive constitutional power. Neither may the courts adjudicate a criminal prosecution that examines such presidential actions. The court thus concludes that the president is absolutely immune from criminal prosecution for conduct within his exclusive sphere of constitutional authority. Wow. I think that's pretty breathtaking. I mean, I can see, and we're going to look at this in a minute, why the Biden-Harris campaign is kind of having their own mini stroke right now. In addition to all the other problems President Biden has, this is just another one on their plate. And as I said earlier, you can bet Jack Smith is not enjoying life right now. All right. Not all the president's official acts fall within. Go ahead, Sefer.
Jack Smith is probably having a coronary right now.
Oh, I'm sure he's not having a good day. That I can guarantee you. All right, not all the president's official acts fall within his preclusive authority. The reasons that justify the president's absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for acts within the scope of his exclusive constitutional authority do not extend to conduct in areas where his authority is shared with Congress. To determine the president's immunity in this context, the courts looks preliminary to the framers' design of the presidency within the separation of powers. And it goes on, talks about presidential immunity in the civil context and criminal cases where the president's resisted prosecutorial demands for documents. And what you're going to notice a lot of times is the Supreme Court, when they make a ruling, they look back to our founding fathers and documents that they have wrote, articles that they wrote, where they simply expressed what they were trying to do or their reasonings behind something. You may hear occasionally the Supreme Court oftentimes goes back to something called the Federalist Papers. That's essentially what that is. It's essays and writings of our founding fathers, specifically 2 or 3 of them. I believe one of them was Hamilton. It is Hamilton, it says right here, where they are discussing these very concepts. Matter of fact, this first sentence pretty well says what I just said. The framers designed the presidency to provide for a rigorous and energetic executive. The Federalist, number 70, pages 470 and 472. They vested the president with supervisorial and policy responsibilities of utmost discretion and sensitivity. That was restated in Nixon versus Fitzgerald, which, again, just to remind everybody, was that case back from, I believe, 1981-82, where they determined that a president has absolute immunity in civil context, as far as civil cases are concerned. Cannot sue a president for damages for action as he did as president of the United States. So, again, I'm not going to read each and every word of this, but this beginning part here was extremely important, that we understand exactly what's going on, appreciating the unique risk that arise when a president's energies are diverted by proceedings that might render him unduly cautious in the discharge of his official duties. The court has recognized presidential immunities and privileges rooted in the constitutional tradition of the separation of powers and supported by our histories. It's really difficult to say with a straight face, in my opinion, that the founding fathers never intended for us to have a president that has essentially immunity from criminal prosecution for his official acts. It's basically what the court is saying here. If we did not allow that, if we did not allow a president to be exercising this absolute immunity, then you're going to have a president that is worried about a pair of handcuffs waiting for him every time he leaves office. You're going to have a president that is so worried about damage to himself, his family, his businesses, his ability to earn a living, whatever, that he's not going to be able to act in such a way that is for the betterment of our society, our constitutional republic as a whole. A president may decide not to take a bold and aggressive action because they know there's a Fannie Willis, there's a Letitia Brown, there's a Judge Kushan or Chalkin, whatever her name is, waiting for me to give an account. There's a Jack Smith, special prosecutor, trying to make a name for himself by hammering me, trying to throw me in jail. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Any comment on that, Sever?
Yes. If the president does not have immunity, then from this point forward, every future president, when they leave office, would be investigated by their predecessor's attorney general.
Exactly. And now that the Democrats have opened this can of worms, so to speak, you can bet that's exactly what's going to happen. We've talked about this privately, but President Biden, for example, he could clearly, theoretically, be essentially arrested once he leaves office for many things. One thing that sticks out in my mind is his, well, I don't remember what the word is, but we'll just call it withdrawal. It was a disaster from Afghanistan. And here's the key with that. He made this withdrawal contrary to advice from the professionals, his generals, the individuals that are in charge of the military. Contrary to their advice, he said, no, I want you out. I want you out this way, and I want you out now. And at a minimum, it resulted in 13 U.S. service members being lost because this whole pullout, this whole withdrawal was an absolute disaster. I could clearly see some type of murder charge, some kind of involuntary manslaughter charge, or something along them lines, especially given the fact that he was advised not to do what he did. Right? Is that? I mean, it's pretty simple when you think of it that way. So, at any rate, let's hope. Go ahead.
From the information that I have, Secretary of Defense Austin did not want to do it like that, and that Biden overruled him.
Yeah, and if you remember at the debate the other day too, he couldn't even remember those men and women that were lost there inside that airport with that.
He said no one got killed on my watch in the military.
Yeah, he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, but we're all pretty familiar with that. Let's see, Zach made a couple other comments. I can understand that there can be dissenting opinions, but they are harder to understand when they are distributed in a particular way. I agree with that, Zach. And then Johnny Dog, I believe they will burn it all down to catch up. Yeah, unfortunately, Johnny, you're probably right. How can these people claim that they love our country, that they love America, when they are doing this in the way of lawfare, trying to take President Trump off the ballot? I mean, these are things you do to destroy a country. And we probably don't think much about it because we have all lived in a time where, for the most part, we've all had food, clean running water, housing, relatively a safe place to live with our families, our loved ones. Obviously, there's been wars and skirmishes, but overall, we have all lived probably better than anyone has ever lived in history. And when these people do this type of behavior, it only endangers our country. It only puts us all at risk of losing this great experiment in democracy that we all live under. And it's just really striking to me how you can have President Biden always talking negative about Donald Trump, that the January 6th stuff, he was trying to get rid of democracy, or what he did put us in a danger. And yet you have a president today that is so clearly ill, so clearly sick, that instead of doing the right thing by allowing another capable Democrat to run on their agenda and face Trump, he's insistent, I'm not going to get out. And yet he knows, we all know, that him doing so is only going to weaken America, weaken the Democratic ticket, and probably throw things out of kilter to where there may actually be too many Republicans in Congress. I'm talking about the Senate and the House and the presidency. Generally, a divided government of some sort works out better for us all. Comment?
Right, I agree. Kamala Harris keeps talking about this stupid abortion ban. But what she fails to tell the Americans is that in order to pass an abortion ban, it takes 60 votes in the Senate. That will never happen.
Well, you know, I would say this. I would say it is a much better. How would I word it? It's much better if we truly have the two separate parties in the how, you know, in other words, you have the presidency with one party, and you have the House and the Senate with the other. Because let's be honest about it, that divided government works a lot better than having one party rule. If you remember back even with Obama, remember that when the Democrats all took over, that's when we had this Obamacare, and we can debate as to whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but clearly it is the case that when one party takes over, it just makes it much more difficult, at least in my opinion, to compromise and do what's right for the country. Because why would you bother compromising when you have a situation where you already have the power? You don't have to compromise. There's no reason to compromise when you already control everything, right? Is that
I kind of disagree a little bit.
All right, tell me
what. Recently, the House impeached Mayorkas, and Chuck Schumer refused to have a trial.
Well, I agree.
And he dismissed it outright. And it was a valid impeachment. It was an impeachment because he lied to House committees on several occasions. And then Chuck Schumer said, no, it's not worded right. It's like,
well, I think that's a fair point that you're making. But let me tell you this, we'll just have to agree to disagree on that. I'm of the deliberate opinion that if one party controls too much of the government, it might not be a good thing. Because if I'm being perfectly honest with you, there are things the Democrats generally stand for that I don't agree with. And
right.
I think that it's much better to have a divided government, at least to some extent, because that way the parties have to come together if they want to move legislation through, similar to what Ronald Reagan did. And basically, you generally get a better result, a more mainstream centrist result, when you have the divided government. Normally, in my experience, when one party either way controls something, that's when you're probably going to have problems. But I agree, reasonable people can definitely disagree on that, and I don't have no issue with that. Now, let's move back to
that being
go ahead if you got a comment on it.
Yeah. That being said, I do not agree with what are called supermajorities. You know, the
exactly
razor thin, putting it mildly, majority is better, because then you have to negotiate with the other side.
Well, I guess I could agree that a supermajority is even worse than just not having the split government. But I want to finish this part up right here, because here's the actual decision, and you can see exactly how the court split. It says the case poses a question of lasting significance. Again, that's going back to Alito's comment that we're writing a rule for the ages. When may a former president be prosecuted for official acts taken during his presidency? And answering that question, unlike the political branches and the public at large, the court cannot afford to fixate exclusively or even preliminarily or present agencies is what it says here. Don't want to get in too deep on the weeds on some of these words here.
Right.
Enduring separation of power principles guide our decision in this case. The president enjoys no criminal immunity for his unofficial acts. Boom. And not everything a president does is official. The president is not above the law, but our system of separate powers, the president may not be prosecuted for exercising his core constitutional duties, and he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for his official acts. The immunity applies equally to all occupants of the Oval Office. Now, the reason, in my opinion, they put this in here is because further down in the document, we are not going to cover all that. Just in general, you had Justice Jackson, for example. She gave her opinion. It was pretty scathing. And I think this is Roberts trying to take the initiative to respond to her. And her comment is essentially now what she worries about. It's kind of what she said during the oral argument. She's like, hey, I'm very worried that a president now can look at this as a license to do whatever they want to do. A president can look at this as an invitation to do anything they want to do because they're above the law. And again, as I've said before, she's missing the point as usual. And exactly what's at stake here. In my opinion, it's much more stomach. I can stomach it better that a potential president that might break the law. And by the way, it hasn't happened in 230 some years, right? A president might violate the law. Well, if that happens, it happens. And we have a way to fix that. It's called the impeachment. And then the Senate can remove a president that is doing something that a president should not be doing. I mean, that's what the founders put in to counter this problem. But according to Justice Jackson, she's worried that it's just now going to be a hotbed of corruption. And I think that's what Roberts is trying to address right here, making these type of statements, is that the president has to have immunity to do his job and to have the three separate branches of government. My point is the following, and then we're going to read the conclusion. My point is, it is worth the risk, because it's never happened, that a president could do something wrong and go unpunished. But that may be the price we have to pay if we all want to continue to live in freedom. In other words, it's worth one person maybe getting away with something that's never happened in our entire history to make sure that we all live free.
I agree.
Any comment on that? All right. I think it's pretty straightforward. Totally. All right. And then finally, folks, here is the conclusion that was handed down. And we can count them together and you'll see exactly how the court split on these particular issues. Roberts, and CJ is Chief Justice, delivered the opinion of the court in which Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and JJ is basically an associate justice, joined in full, in which Barrett, that's number 6, joined except for part 3C. And I think that has to do with, if I remember, the 3C has to do with the issue as to whether or not she thought January 6th would be part of the official duties or not. But at any rate, she's number 6, concurring with the opinion. So you have the 6. Remember, there's 9 justices, and then you have Sotomayor, and then you have Kagan and Jackson joined in dissenting opinions. And I believe that Jackson did write her own dissent. So you clearly have the 6-3 split on that particular opinion. And personally, I'm not surprised by that, but it's sad that with something of such significance and importance that they could not find a way to come together like they did on having him removed, or having Donald Trump removed off the ballot. Remember, that particular decision was unanimous. And of course, this decision here, unfortunately, is going to go down as the 6-3 vote. Having said that, the more I'm thinking about it, the original case of Fitzgerald versus Nixon in the early 80s, remember yesterday, it was a 5-4 decision granting the president of the United States absolute immunity in a civil context. So I think that's pretty good. We have Nick Nack giving a cheer out, and Zach is saying yay. The president, and Yak says the president still can't order someone to do criminal or legal. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That doesn't change anything. That's a great point, Nick Yak. That's exactly correct. A president that engages in criminal behavior, no matter what you hear the pundits on TV saying, as you switch to another program later today, the president still cannot commit crimes. It's just that simple. If there's something he does that is what they call a high crime and or misdemeanor, he can be removed from office by the impeachment process. And again, you go to the House, simple majority, and then they have a trial in the Senate. And it takes, I believe it's a 3/4 vote to remove a president in that particular situation. And again, there was good reason that they did that. The reasoning obviously was it was a compromise to make sure they did not, what they were scared of back in those days, folks, they were scared of having a king. I mean, that's exactly what they were scared of. They were just deathly concerned. Are we going to be in a situation where we are facing a king in the future? And obviously that's one of the many things that brought about our independence, was the fact that we wanted to be free. We did not want to be subject to some type of monarchy. And I think that that's a quick and easy way to sum all that. Comment on that, Sefer?
Yeah. Comment on Justice Jackson. She
Go ahead.
thought, and I listened to the oral arguments, she thought that the president consults with the attorney general, and the attorney general tells him what is legal and what isn't.
Well, the only problem with that, let me pop back over to that and see if I can get. Let me see if we can look at what Jackson said. We'll just take a quick little detour. I think that's a good point, and let's just take a quick yonder and let's see if we can figure out what the what they were trying to do or not do. Let me see if let me get this to pull back up quickly. I think it's clear that Justice Jackson is not happy under any stretch of the imagination, which, as far as I'm concerned, is so sad and too bad. But let's take a quick peek at it here. But I want you to think about that, though. You have to consult with your attorney general. So if the attorney general is in the so-called conspiracy with you, then I guess it's legal, right?
Right.
I mean, that sounds absurd. So,
It's,
you know, I mean,
that is
what are you going to do?
absurd,
You just going to give the president? Go ahead.
the whole purpose of the attorney general is that the Justice Department is supposed to be independent of the White House. At least that's my understanding.
Well, I would say that I would say that they try to get. I would say they try to always say that it's independent. You know, they don't want it to look like the president's always calling the shots, whatever the Supreme Court or whatever the DOJ, Department of Justice, is doing. But you are right; it does not always. I mean, I think everybody knows folks, when you get right down to it, everything is political. I mean, yeah. I'm sure that doesn't shock anybody, right? But clearly this Justice Jackson, she's got serious issues, and she's not too happy. So we're going to take a look at her opinion in brief. Okay, here's the end of Sotomayor's opinion, and then here's Jackson's dissent. So this is Justice Jackson. Jackson, if you're nasty. All right, Supreme Court of the United States. All right, this is her dissenting. Justice Sotomayor has thoroughly addressed the court's flawed reasoning and conclusion as a matter of history, tradition, logic, law, and logic. I agree with every word of her powerful dissent, aka we're BFFs and we're pretty PO'd about this, right? Okay, and she wants to go into. She goes, I also address what the paradigm shift means for our nation moving forward. To fully appreciate the profound change the majority has wrought, one must first acknowledge what it means to have immunity from criminal prosecution. And that's not what the justices said. They did not grant the president absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for personal acts, but that's what she implies with the statement.
Right.
She says, put simply, she says immunity is exemption from the duties and liabilities imposed by law. I agree with that, and that's per the Black Laws Dictionary. And of course, she's trying to conflate issues that are not worth conflating or supposed to be conflated. It is purest form. In its purest form, the concept of immunity boils down to the maximum: the king can do no wrong, a notion that was firmly rejected at the birth of our republic. Okay, well, I agree with all that. I just don't agree with obviously what her conclusion is going to be. It says someone is immune from criminal prosecution is to say that, like a king, it is not under the coercive power of the law and will not suppose him capable of committing a folly, much less a crime. Again, referring back to Blackstone, which is the authority, aka on legal definitions. It says, thus, being immune is not like having a defense under law. Rather, it means the law does not apply to the immunized person in the first place. And again, she's going on a limb here, in my opinion. It's not an immunized person; it's an immunized branch of government. Right. You can see where their thinking is just not on the same way.
She's going off of
right. Well, I just want to point out to the viewers, when you're looking back at this, you got to learn how to dissect this dogma and this, these statements that she's making, because she's conflating many different subjects. She's making assertions that are frankly untrue. be perfectly blunt with you, she's kind of wrapping lies together because she's not given the complete and honest truth, in my opinion, of what's going on. So anybody that's listening now or that watches this in the future, just always make sure you dissect and you think, well, what is this person saying? And she goes on, is undisputed that immunity from liability for wrongdoing is the exception rather than the rule in the American criminal justice system. That is entirely unsurpassing. For the very idea of immunity stands in tension with the foundational principles of our government, our system of government. It is a core tenet that our democracy, that the people are sovereign, and the rule of law is the first and final security. From their own experience and their deep reading in history, the founders knew that law alone saves a society from being rent by the strife or ruled by the brute powers, however disguised. Obviously, she's trying to wrap herself in an American flag and trying to make something that's not there. Again, folks, it's not a person. It's the position that a person has, and that's exactly right. I agree with you on that there, Sapphire. It says all the offices of the government, from the highest to the lowest, are creatures of the law and are bound to obey it. And she cites case law. Now, that doesn't mean that she's citing this case law correctly. Hell, I can take a bunch of case laws and put them together and, whatever. So doesn't mean anything. She goes on, the foundational presuppositions are reflected in a procedural paradigm and I should say of rules and accountability that operates in the realm of criminal law. What I call an individual accountability model. I mean, she's getting deep in the weeds here, folks, on this. I'm gonna try to simplify this. When the federal government believes that someone has run afoul of a criminal statute and decides to exercise its prosecutorial discretion to pursue punishment for that violation, it persuades a grand jury that there is probable cause to indict. But what she doesn't tell you, and what she's glossing over, is that not all of our DAs, our prosecutors, solicitors, whatever you want to call them, are good and honest people and always have pure intention. The logical flaw in what she's saying here, folks, is she's assuming Fannie Willis is a good and upstanding person and can do no wrong. And that her bringing charges and the fact that a grand jury allowed the charges to go forward means that there's something there worth having a trial over. And we all know that that's BS. It's complete muck. That's exactly what it is. The old expression is you can indict a ham sandwich. I believe is one of the solicitors or one of the prosecutors from New York a long time ago made that comment. You can indict a ham sandwich. That's true. When a prosecutor uses a grand jury, it doesn't really mean that they've looked at the case and decided to go forward with the case. A lot of times a grand jury is essentially an instrument that a prosecutor uses in order to compel evidence to be brought forward. It's a way for them to essentially have power over other individuals to get evidence or to get testimony. And the bottom line, you remember with a grand jury, just because there's an indictment does not mean in any way, form, or fashion that it's just proper and that there's something there to examine. It just does not mean that. And we need to keep that in mind as we think about this, all right? So moving on with this here, for his part, the defendant stands accused but is presumed innocent until conviction upon trial or guilty plea. Yeah, like that really works in this Trump case, right? Well, we all know that that's the presumption of innocence definitely has never been afforded to Donald Trump. I think that's pretty that's pretty obvious. The defendant may also rise in attempt to prove affirmative defenses. Affirmative defenses is just a fancy way to say you're defensive, well, I guess immunity would be an affirmative defense. I wasn't there would be an affirmative defense. So there's all kinds of different affirmative defenses that you can state. Importantly, a defense is not an immunity, even though a defense, okay, well, so what? We don't care anything about that. All right. All of this is to say that our government has long functioned under an accountability paradigm. She loves that word paradigm. You notice that? I guess she thinks she's super intelligent. It sounds to me like she used AI, but I don't know. I digress. Yeah. Under an accountability paradigm in which no one is above the law. An accused person is innocent until proven guilty. A criminal defendants may raise defenses, both legal and factual, tailored to their particular circumstance. So I think what she's trying to say is the president can always get a trial, and we always know he's going to be okay. What she's not taking into account is look what happened in New York City.
Right.
Look what happened several times in New York City, Donald Trump, not just these so-called slander cases, but he also now has 34 felonious convictions, and we all know that it's muck. It's made up. It's nothing. We
Right.
know the prosecutor's corrupt. We know the judge is corrupt. We know his family has extensive Democratic ties. I mean, his daughter, for example, is just not a Democratic worker. She's a Democratic, big time, top of the pyramid type of. Yeah, she's a huge fundraiser. I mean, she is part of what you would call the Democratic Party. I don't really think there's any other way to explain that or to dissect that. And again, we've talked about it. It's go ahead.
I have
Go ahead, Sam.
some knowledge about her.
Okay.
My cousin Billy is running for state rep in Illinois, and
Right.
he's a Blue Dog Democrat. He said she is the #1 fundraiser in the Democratic Party.
Well, I'm sure she is. She's brought in by published reports in excess of $93 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what is striking about that too is you have Justice Alito, who they brought a ton of pressure to bear because of supposed flags he was flying outside his house,
Right.
outside his vacation house, and they wanted him to recuse himself over flags. And yet they don't see any problem with that when it comes to Judge Merchan having donated to Joe Biden.
Right.
They see no problem with that. With his daughter, who he has been to Democratic events with, is a very highly paid, highly acting individual. She's an agent of the Democratic Party. I mean, there's another word I'm trying to think of, but the bottom line is she embodies the Democratic Party.
Judge Carol Scheinland from New York,
Right.
she said that this is beyond unprecedented, that this case should have never been brought. And also, Judge Judy said you had to twist yourself in a pretzel to find out what the crime actually was, she said, and we still don't know.
It's kind of hard to say that with a straight face that anybody would believe that President Trump got a fair trial. It should not be this way in America, but why is it okay that you can have someone like Letitia James, Attorney General of New York City, you can have Alvin Bragg, you have a DA there in New York City that is allowed to run on a platform that I'm going to get Trump. I'm going to take that guy out for you, just elect me, and somehow that's okay. That goes against everything that these individuals are supposed to stand for. And that's the reason on many occasions I have called for change in that regard. We need to have oversight in some way, some manner for these people. The United States is the only major industrialized country that I have been able to find that does not have some type of check on our prosecutors, DAs. These people can bring charges against anybody they want and ruin their lives. Most of us don't have the money to fight some type of huge campaign or some type of indictment like that. We have to rely on, AKA, a public defender. And we know what's going on there. The public defenders, they don't have a whole lot to defend you with. If you don't believe me, just walk into any type of prosecutor's office, attorney general's office. You walk in the front door. It's a huge, nice building. They got some very professional looking staff out front with state-of-the-art computers connected directly with the FBI and any other agency they wish to collaborate with. I mean, they have everything you can imagine in a modern office, and you're instructed to go see the district attorney. I can promise you it's in the bowels of the courthouse in some darkly lit basement that you have a hard time finding. You walk into the public defender's office, you're going to see a stark contrast, including piles of papers and cases just thrown together, trying to find a way to go through all that nonsense. And the bottom line is you're pretty well pressured to settle. that January 6th case that was just thrown out by the United States Supreme Court, some of the charges included with President Trump, they were using that statute. It's an Enron error type of law, and they were using it kind of like Alvin Bragg did like with a legal, that's what they call a novel legal type of approach. They're trying to make something that's not there. Basically a violation of the law. And of course, it was not a violation of the law. That's what the Supreme Court just ruled. But the reason they were using that law, number one, they couldn't find a good law to prosecute these people under. And then number two, the other thing was that law carried a 20-year prison sentence. So here's the spill. Mr. January 6th individual, you either come in and plead guilty right now and do 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, or we're going to put you on trial and we're going to give you 20 years in prison. That's exactly what happened. I can assure you that if you're ever in that situation, because I hear people tell me all the time, oh, JR, I would never plead guilty and tell a judge I did something I didn't do. Yeah. I've been like that in my life too. Think I would never do something and then learn, then I live to eat my words. You never know unless you're in that situation. You're facing 20 years away from your wife, kids, family, whatever. You're going to be surprised what you're going to say you did. You'll probably admit to doing to assassination of JFK. I'm not making a joke. If you have enough pressure brought on you by our government with unfettered, unlimited power, assets, whatever, you're fighting a losing game. That's just the way it is. Why do you think 99.9% of the cases out there are settled? They don't go to trial.
Yep.
And if you go to trial, you're going to get more time.
I can tell you a little bit about something like that. My cousin, God rest his soul, was a coke addict. And he used to work at a place that was a chop shop. And he got busted for it, and he did his time, and he got out, and he said, I'm never doing that again. Well, he moved out of the Chicago area, and his neighbor across the street had a car that he just needed to deliver to a judge. Well, it turned out the car belonged to a lawyer, and the lawyer was getting divorced and didn't want the car to go to his ex. And the guy across the street had my cousin deliver the car to a federal agent. So they busted
happens
for what is called the Dyer Act, which he had a previous conviction. So they told him, either you accept this plea or we're going to put you in jail for 30 years.
It happens all the time, my friend.
He accepted the plea, and he did like 2 or 3 years and got out. But I always thought about that. Hey, wait a minute. He was away from that lifestyle. And this guy basically entrapped him, and he could have proven it. But instead of taking a chance of 30 years, he chose to take the plea and do 3 years, which I don't blame him for that.
I'm just telling you, I've lived long enough to know I try to always stay away from saying I would never, because generally when I say that, something comes up and, you live to eat your words type of thing. So one of the reasons I like doing this channel, I like having these conversations, is I have a lot of experience with courts and stuff like this. Now, before I know what everybody's thinking by that comment, no, I don't have a criminal record. No, I've never been tried criminally for anything. But I have a lot of friends that are criminal lawyers, specifically one in mine's a criminal defense lawyer in Dallas, Texas. And I have actually worked with him, especially back in the early 90s when he was a younger criminal defense attorney, and I just kind of go as kind of an assistant and help him out. And I learned how it works. And then just with my own businesses, my own business life and stuff like this, I have seen a lot of nasty stuff, how these so-called regulators treat people, especially if you're not part of the the loop. You have to learn. I think President Trump said it best. You have to learn how power works. And that's
Right.
the honest to God truth. You have to learn how power works. If you don't learn how power works, you are in trouble. It's really that simple. So we're going to go to the questions real quick. I want to thank everybody on X joining us. We got a little group on YouTube. Thank y'all. And I got my friend on Twitch again. Hello. All right. So let's go back and let's take a quick peek at the questions here that we still got. Zach, it looked bleak a year ago. Yeah, it's definitely been a good week for President Trump, especially with this this debate debacle. I mean, what else would you call it?
Right.
It has looked pretty bad. How much fun watching them panic? Yeah, they are definitely in panic. These woke Democrats are not having a good week. You got a lot of blacks that are turning to the Republican Party. You just got a lot of everybody turning to the Republican Party. A lot of sweating going on.
It's fun to watch Cenk from the Young Turks.
Yeah.
Head explode.
Dude, I believe it was Gretchen Whitmer, whatever the governor there is in Minnesota.
Yeah.
She came out today essentially saying that Michigan is lost for Joe Biden. There is no recovery for him. She's the governor of Michigan, if I got my people together straight. Even if Joe doesn't step down, they're threatened to leak the crimes. That's pretty funny. Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do about that, because technically speaking, there is no way of actually making President Biden withdraw. If he doesn't die, if he doesn't have a true disability in the sense of like he's in a coma, or if he essentially, he's either got to remove himself, essentially resign, he's got to have some type of serious disability, some type of serious health issue. Other than that, there's really no way they can make him not have the nomination. And it's so close to the deadlines right now coming. I believe the first one out of Ohio is coming up August 11th or right about there. It's near impossible to get rid of this guy, to get this guy out. So they definitely have a serious problem there.
Yeah, the only thing that they have is the 25th Amendment. And Chip Roy is filing a motion in Congress today that says that the vice president must meet with the cabinet and that they must consider replacing him.
It's going to be interesting to see exactly if they are able to do what they're wanting to do. But my personal opinion is it's too late. But we will see how that that works out.
The only option that they have is to get him to resign, which the meeting that he reports from, I should say, the meeting that they had yesterday, is that the person pushing him not to resign is Joe Biden. The report I read this morning said that she cloisters him away from anyone that would even talk to him about resigning.
Well, he's also got his wife lying to him. You remember me talking, I talk extensively about George Washington, how he's one of my favorite non-religious, if not my most favorite non-religious historical figure, not because he founded America, but because he was able to step down from power. He set the tradition. It was the first time in history where power changed hands peacefully without one bullet being fired and without any bloodshed. And he set that example, and we have obviously continued in that tradition. And it's something I don't think he gets enough credit for. And that's exactly what's going on now with Joe Biden. It's hilarious to see Joe Biden constantly beating this drum of how bad Donald Trump is and how he only thinks about himself. He only cares about himself. And allegedly that's what January 6th was all about. This type of nonsense is what he says all the time. Yet Joe Biden's wife, Dr. Jill Biden, will not, and I say doctor in a funny sense, obviously, but they will not do best for the country and step down and let somebody else, because listen, even if Donald Trump loses, God forbid, let's say he loses, I want there to be a Democrat in office that can do the job. Someone that's got their faculty, somebody that the people elect, to be perfectly blunt with you about it, not somebody that just gets in because someone else died. I don't think there's a reasonable minded individual that can say that Joe Biden is in good health or has control of his faculties. I heard a report prior to us going on air that Joe Biden is up roughly from, say, 9, 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's about the only time he can be expected to be coherent enough to do what needs to be done. I mean, it's really a difficult situation. And one final thing on that 25th Amendment, that is the most poorly written part of our now Constitution. That 25th Amendment. If you read it, it's extremely vague. It's just a poorly drafted type of situation. Because think of this: if a president hears talk that they're thinking of invoking the 25th Amendment, it says basically that they can go ahead and they can have a meeting and his cabinet can remove him. But what happens if the president fires his cabinet before his cabinet has an opportunity to vote?
Joe Biden isn't going to fire them. He hasn't fired anybody in his entire presidency.
Yeah, but just go
those that were responsible for the Afghanistan withdrawal.
Yep. And let's take we're just going to do a quick hypothetical. What if Joe Biden, what if any president knows they are seriously being looked at to have the 25th Amendment revoked over? I know what I would do if I thought I was in power and I was in control of my faculties and whatever's going on. I just simply fire them and hire in a new cabinet. Make sure I put people in that are loyal and that I don't have to worry about invoking the 25th Amendment. I mean, there's no provision. Let me say this.
Yeah. The problem with that is they have to be confirmed by the Senate, which takes months, and he doesn't have months.
Well, the thing is, though, to fire them, they don't have to be confirmed by the Senate. He can simply say you're fired.
Yeah.
Well,
but the
no.
all have to
Sapphire, give me 1 second. I want you to hear me. I don't want to talk over you. Okay. You cannot stop the president from firing his cabinet. He can simply say, you're fired. And that's it. You're done. You're out of your position. It does not require any Senate approval for the dismissal. Somebody that's going to be an acting individual will generally assume that role. But you are correct. The Senate has to essentially approve. I believe the Constitution says consult and approve, something to that effect, whoever replaces them people. But I'm just saying it's so poorly written that is obviously a quick way to get around that. Any final comment on that subject?
No, advice and consent of the Senate is what it's called.
All right, there you go. Let's finish up this assessment here of Jackson's dissenting opinion. All right, I just want to kind of get through this and then we can move on. It says applying the majority's new presidential accountability model thus seems to involve bearing down on the indictment's allegations and making a series of determinations about the nature of the conduct at issue. Okay, I agree with that so far. From the structure of the paradigm, it appears that the first discussion point is whether the alleged criminal conduct involves one of the president's core powers. We understand that so far, right?
Mm-hmm.
If so, and apparently, regardless of the degree to which the conduct implicates that core power, the president is absolutely immune from criminal liability for engaging in that criminal conduct. If not, then one must proceed to consider whether the conduct qualifies as an official act or an unofficial act of the president. If the crime is an official act, the president is presumptually immune from criminal prosecution and punishment. But even then, immunity still hinges on whether there is a legal or factual basis for concluding that the presumption of immunity has been rebutted. Alternatively, if the charged conduct is unofficial, which he refers to as a determination that incidentally the courts must make without considering the president's motives. We've talked about that. You cannot go into the mind of the president. You have to take it at its face. The president is not immune. The majority's multi-layered, multifaceted threshold parsing of the character of the president's criminal conduct differs from the individual accountability model in several crucial respects. For one thing, it makes it next to impossible to know ex ante when and under what circumstances a president will be subject to accountability for his criminal acts. For every allegation, courts must run this gauntlet first, no matter how well documented or heinous the criminal act might be. So what she's complaining about is the rules that the justices have put down. Essentially, you cannot go into the mind and or motives of the president in determining whether or not there was some kind of criminal incentive, some kind of criminal desire behind whatever the president does. To me, that's just common sense. But this justice obviously has a serious problem. That, it's striking to me that a person would worry so much about whether one person, aka a president, might get away with some type of illegal activity that has never happened in the history of our country. And yet she is willing to weaken, if not outright destroy, allow the deep state, aka the judicial branch of government, to swallow up the executive branch. Just unbelievable that these people are supposed to be really good at their craft, really good at their trade, and this is the kind of nonsense they spit out. Comment?
I agree. Her legal views are nonsensical.
I think that's very evident. And again, she was put in that office or that position because, as Joe Biden would say, he wanted to put a black woman in there, which to me is really, really sad, because it shouldn't be what you look like or what your skin color is. It should be based, as Dr. King would say,
Right.
on the content of your character. And I would say on in this particular situation, not just your character. They always consider character when putting these people on the bench, but it should be about who is the best person to fill this particular job, not what your skin color is. Again, it just sends the wrong message to everybody.
Right. Professor Nez calls it a DEI hire. Didn't earn
That's
it.
exactly what it is. It's a DEI hire. DEI should be DEAD. That's just my humble opinion on it.
Yeah, he says DEI means didn't earn it.
I like that. I'm going to remember that. Didn't earn it. That's exactly right. Under the individual accountability paradigm, well, she just loves that word, doesn't she? The accountability analysis is markedly less convoluted and leads to a more certain outcome. None of the same complications or consequences arise because, as I have explained, but every defendant can assert whatever legal arguments and defenses might be applicable under governing laws. She just doesn't understand. It's not that easy. Most Americans cannot afford a team of lawyers. We simply cannot afford to bring in whoever the modern day Johnny Cochran is. You
Right.
follow what I'm saying? It takes a lot of blood and treasure to have to defend yourself. And I think that's what she doesn't understand, or she doesn't want to understand. Comment?
I agree. She comes up with these ideas that are just out of left field somewhere.
It's just striking. She's worried about something that has never been a problem, and that for somehow now she thinks is going to be a problem.
Yeah.
I would say, if you're reading between the lines, she just hates Trump so bad, she's just willing to go ahead and put our country at risk because she wants to, as Alan Dershowitz would say, get Trump. What do you say?
Yeah, she worries about things that don't exist.
I think that's a good way to put it. That point bears emphasizing. Immunity can issue for presidents under the majority's model, even for unquestionable and intellectually egregious criminal behavior, regardless of the nature or impact of the president's criminal conduct, so as long as he's committing crimes pursuant to the powers invested exclusively by him, by the Constitution, or as needed to carry out his constitutional duties without due caution, he is likely to be deemed immune from persecution. Amen. That's all I got to say about that. She obviously doesn't like that. Ultimately, the majority's model simply sets a criminal law to one side when it comes to crimes allegedly committed by the president. Again, I just strongly disagree with her. The structure and function of the two accountability paradigms are not the only differences. The models also assign different roles to participants in the criminal justice system, and they ultimately generate different relationships between the presidency and the rule of law. Under the individual accountability model, duty-bound prosecutorial officers initially exercise discretion to decide whether to seek punishment for alleged violations of criminal law, determination that is made based on numerous factors. By contrast, under the majority's new presidential accountability paradigm, again, I'm going to be sick of that word by the time I'm done with it, what a prosecutor or jury does may not even matter, since the courts take the center stage once charges are brought against a former president, marshaling their resources to conduct a complex and amorphous threshold immunity evaluation. That's just big words and kind of a word salad, saying she doesn't like the procedures the Supreme Court has put in place pursuant to a president's official duties, whether a former president will be entirely exempted from the dictates of the law, such that the roles of their participants in the criminal justice system process become relevant, requires a judicial assessment in the first instance of his criminal conduct and the circumstances under which he acted. She's kind of just restating the same crap over and over again. Right. Under the majority's immunity regime, by contrast, the president can commit crimes in the course of his job, even under circumstances in which no one thinks he has any excuse. The law simply does not apply to him. I disagree with her entirely. They have said, well, I mean, Sapphire, they have said at the beginning of the findings here that anything to do with his personal behavior, in effect, not related to his job as president, he is culpable for, just like you and me are. I don't know why she doesn't get that. I think what it is, she's allowing the fact that this is Donald Trump to interfere with her judgment process. You agree?
Yeah.
It says, yes, Justice Sotomayor has already warned of the dire consequences that are likely to follow from the majority's decision in this case. I have thus far endeavored merely to explain what today's court ruling amounts to on a theoretical level. The court abandonment of the individual accountability model as applied to presidents, and its introduction of the new presidential accountability model that authorizes the judiciary to exempt presidents from punishment under law, depending on the official or unofficial character of the criminal conduct at issue. However, I will highlight two observations about the results that follow from this paradigm shift. First, by changing the accountability paradigm in this fashion, the court has unilaterally altered the balance of power between the three coordinated branches of government as it relates to the rule of law, aggrandizing power in the judiciary and executive to the detriment of Congress. Second, the majority's new presidential accountability model undermines the constraints of law as a deterrent for future presidents who might otherwise abuse their power to the detriment of all of us. She just doesn't get it. You know, I think on some level, this entire document is a call to action of the Congress. In other words, stop relying on the United States Supreme Court to make a de facto law, because Congress will not do the hard work and make a law. Congress technically has all the power. They can change the rules if that's what they choose to do by voting on them accordingly, and they can actually amend the Constitution by going through the constitutional amendment process. So instead of relying on the court to fix these very tough and difficult issues, if they don't like the office of the presidency and they don't like the power that the executive branch has, then they need to work to change it. And of course, that's kind of what I think this document is screaming about, among other things. But I don't get it, why she just doesn't understand how important it is to separate the powers. Comment?
I agree. Also, I heard commentary this morning that if Trump is elected, which it looks like he overwhelmingly will be, that Thomas and Alito have said that they will retire.
If Trump's reelected?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that, yeah.
And it also said that Sotomayor is not in good health, and that would be 3 appointments.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, you know, clearly the 3 appointments Trump has already made has made a very strong impact on America as a whole. Because if he wouldn't have appointed those 3 justices, then you would have 3 more in addition to the, well, 2 or 3 liberals that would have already still been on there, it would have just went the other way.
Right.
Nick Nack is saying the way it's going, New York will be in play. Yeah, I believe there's only like 7 percentage points separating Trump and Biden in New York. And I have
Right.
not heard a new poll that has came out beforehand. Of course, I want to extend a warm greeting to Rosemarie Fietti. It's always a pleasure to have you in the conversation. It's always kind of an inside joke around here, as you guys know. So
Yeah.
that's my love right there.
Yeah.
She's at work right now. Don't work too hard, baby. All right, here we go. Considering the structural implications of today's decision from the standpoint of separation of power, until now, Congress's laws passed by the representatives of the people bound the people and their elected officials just the same. Law, we have explained, is the only supreme power in our system of government. Every man who, by accepting office participants in its function, is only the more strongly bound to submit. This is a bunch of this gets into the weeds. I don't want everybody to be totally screamed and confused. The bottom line is
Right.
she and Sotomayor are not happy about this. She's also complaining to distinguish official from unofficial conduct. Majority advises asking whether the former president's conduct was manifestly, or what's that word, palapi, beyond its authority. That's a new word for me. I don't always come across a new word, but let's see what it says here. It means to notice, noticeably or clearly, probably. I'll look it up later. Manifestly or probably beyond its authority, but that test can be illusory.
I think that's supposed to be palpably.
Oh, that probably is it, palpably. They have a speak function on here. That's how I keep my vocabulary. I think you're right there. Thank you. Palpably. Yeah, okay. Yeah, like it's palpable. That makes sense.
Right.
All right. But that test can be illusory, as it is evident by the facts alleged in this very case. With respect to the indictment's allegations concerning petitioners' attempt to assemble false slates of electors in conjunction with the events of January 6, 2020. But remember this, these false electors, that's just an allegation. Remember, we have talked extensively that despite what the mainstream press may tell you, these election laws are not clear cut, folks. Every state generally has their own election laws. And for example, she refers to it as fake electors. Donald Trump and his people would simply refer to it as an alternative slate of electors, which is prescribed by law. If someone, for example, does not get the amount they're supposed to get in the electoral college to claim the presidency, then you're supposed to put up an alternative slate of electors to go to the House of Representatives, right? I mean, that's a lot of people. A lot of people don't know that, but they like to feed you this nonsense. Go ahead, Siffer.
A lot of people don't understand that when the election is happening, both sides create electors, and then the winning side sends their electors to Congress. So they're not false electors, they're alternates, because both sides have created them.
Right. I got you. I like this line right here. This much is clear. Before today, and remember, this is Justice Jackson, if you're nasty, talking.
Right.
You get that joke? Remember that Janet Jackson joke, Miss Jackson, if you're nasty?
Right.
It's a 1980s thing. Never mind.
Right.
This much is clear. Before today, none of these kinds of inquiries was necessary for criminal liability to be fairly assessed with respect to persons accused of having engaged in criminal conduct. Well, my response to that is before today, before Fani Willis, before Letitia James, before this lawfare, before Joe Biden and his cronies, before all this corruption got into our system, at least corruption that is so obvious on its face, she's right. We didn't have to have a need for all this. We didn't have to have a need for a former president to go to court so he can get back on the ballot to run for re-election. We didn't have the need for a former president to defend his own children from Letitia James in New York. We didn't have to have a former president convicted on 34 felonies under a legal a novel legal theory of dead misdemeanors turned into 34 felonious counts, and an attorney general trying to take everything this man has made, including but not limited to incarceration. And we didn't have sweet Fannie Willis and her paramour, Nathan Wade, essentially sucking $1 million of federal and state money into their pockets while they're traveling Napa Valley and all over Belize and taking mini cruises and just having a good old time on our taxpayers' money in an effort to make a name for themselves and destroy our ability to elect who we want to be the next president of the United States. But that's just my opinion. Right?
I agree.
I mean, it's their fault that we're here, but they want to tell you, oh, it's so ridiculous that this is even happening. You know, before today, there was no need for this. Well, you know what, Miss Jackson, you're right. Before today, there was no need for this, but because of these idiots that are trying to destroy our system, what a shame this has all turned out to be. I mean, and again, she's still, listen, I'm on page 114. She's still complaining about the fact that a president is immune from prosecution. What she fails to point out is immune for his official acts. It's kind of like saying Congress is immune for their acts. It just happens to be the executive branch is invested in one person versus like 634 people like you might have with the Congress, 100 senators and 430 some representatives, something
435.
Like that. 435. So so you got 535 members.
What she's also missing is that in Congress, they can go to the well and say anything, and they are immune. They can lie, they can slanderize, they can attack, and they're immune.
It's just amazing how they try to tell everybody that all of these behaviors, the fact that the president has absolute immunity now, that somehow this is perverse, perplexing, it's novel, it's unprecedented, it's just, and when you get right down to it, it's crazy. That's what they want you to believe. But as we've talked about many times, it's not. Judges, police, the prosecutors, as we talked about, judges and some of their staff, you can be in the well, what they call the well, the speaking platform there in Congress, on the Senate and or House side, and what you say is also protected. Absolute immunity. You cannot be prosecuted for slander or anything else. If you want to get and take the podium inside the House and you can say, so-and-so is such and such, you cannot be charged with slander or anything.
Right.
As a word of that. So again, folks, just remember, this is not unprecedented. This is not unique. This is something that's been going on for a long time. So one might ask, what remains of accountability for the presidents under law? With today's paradigm shift, the majority leaves in place only the chance that this court might someday determine that the criminal conduct in question was an unofficial act, and that our government will somehow rebut the presumption of immunity that applies to a president's official acts, such that the criminal consequences might attach. But with the parameters of official and unofficial conduct unknown, I think it is highly unlikely that a sitting president would feel constrained by these remote possibilities. And you know what? I agree with that. That's the reason why they ruled this way. We don't want a president worried about criminal prosecution after he leaves office. Go ahead, Sefer.
I agree with that. She's totally missing the boat.
It's just, what I would say is this. It's clear the difference in the way people think. I mean, I don't really think there's any other way to say it. You have these progressive liberals that believe that we simply can basically use oversight on a president, that a president doesn't need to be free and be powerful like they have always been in our country's history in order to protect our republic constitution, in order to protect our democracy. And, again, these are the same people that think sports should be invaded by men. You know, in other words, if I decide to become a woman tomorrow, I can compete against the U.S. women's sports team. Forget about Title IX and all the advances that women have made over these decades. If I decide that I want to, go from Steve to Steva, I guess I can go ahead and start changing in the women's locker rooms, and I can start competing in women's sports. To be honest with you, at my age, I don't know if it'd make any difference, but the women probably beat me. But
Right.
all joking aside, these are the kind of people that are making these dissents. They don't see anything wrong with that. They think you can rewrite what a woman is, what a man is, that you
Right.
can go ahead and just blur the lines of everything. According to these people, there is no right, there is no wrong. There's just feelings, and it's subject to change. Just
Yeah.
just really striking. And just for the record, I don't want anybody to send me any dirty mail about the sports issues or the trans issues or whatever. I have no problem with anybody, but I do have a problem when my daughters have to compete with someone that may be a male or at least was born a male, and they're changing in the same room with each other. What I think there should be is if there's enough trans people that want to compete, then just have a trans league. They don't have male,
Right.
female, and in a different category. I mean, I don't see no problem with that.
That's my viewpoint also. If
Yeah, I
the
think that's
proper way to fix it is to give the trans people their own league.
an easy fix. Here's the
No.
conclusion of this, and then we're done with this document here. Then we'll go back
Okay.
to chat. So the majority of my colleagues seem to have put their trust in our court's ability to prevent presidents from becoming kings through case-by-case application of the indeterminate standards of their new presidential accountability paradigm. I knew she had to say that word one more time. I fear that they are wrong, but for all of our sakes, I hope they are right. In the meantime, because the risk and power the court has now assumed are intolerable, unwarranted, and plainly antithetic to bedrock constitutional norms, I dissent. That means I'm PO'd in layman's
Right.
terms, right there. So
Yeah.
thank God that this all worked out the way it worked out. I don't know. Go ahead and tell me what comments you got on that, my friend.
The whole thing on men and women's sports, I listened to Riley Gaines' speech over the weekend. What they did to her with Leah Thomas is disgraceful. She said Leah Thomas is a fully intact male and that they were forced to let him disrobe in front of them.
I think I remember all that as it was coming
Yeah.
down. That
I remembered some of it, but I didn't know how detailed it was until I listened to her speech over the weekend.
yes, it's quite striking what they are allowing to be accepted as normal nowadays, and it's almost hard to believe. If I was a kid and they told me all this stuff, what was going to be going on, right now today, I don't know that I would necessarily believe it. I mean, because it's almost unbelievable on some level. I want to take a quick peek. Let's see what the Biden-Harris campaign was stating. I want to just take a quick peek at this, and we'll move on here. So this is from the Biden-Harris campaign. This is their official pullout or printout, whatever you want to call it. And I hope y'all can read it. Let me blow it up just a little bit more and see if that looks like it worked out. All right. Biden-Harris campaign statement on the SCOTUS immunity ruling today. Today's ruling doesn't change the facts, so let's be very clear about what happened on January 6th. Donald Trump snapped after he lost the 2020 election and encouraged a mob to overthrow the results of a free and fair election. Trump is already running for president as a convicted felon for the very same reason he said idly by while a mob violently attacked the Capitol. He thinks he's above the law and he's willing to do anything to gain and hold on to power for himself. Since January 6th, Trump has only grown more unhinged. He's promising to be a dictator on day one, calling for our Constitution to be terminated so he can regain power, and promising a bloodbath if he loses. The American people already reject Donald Trump's self-obsessed quest for power. Once Joe Biden will make sure they reject it for good in November. What you talk about lies and how they always constantly attack Donald Trump for lies. I would be hard pressed to find anything true in what
About
that statement is right there. Isn't that just crazy? That's but they expect us to believe this. I mean, almost none of this is true. He never said he was going to be a dictator. That was said in jest.
Yeah,
as a
he
joke.
said in jest that he would be a dictator on day one. Then he said no.
I don't think any rational person can say that he's unhinged. And then the bloodbath comment was clearly related to the automobile industry. I did a video on that some time ago.
Right.
Having said that, you rest assured that they will do anything and everything they can to tell you that Donald Trump is unhinged and he he's not fit for office, and I think what they really hammer you with nowadays is this constant beating that he is somehow lies. Every time he opens his mouth, he lies, and we all know that's not true. And I think the sad thing about it is this is a clear example of the lying that I'm talking about. All right, let's listen to this real quick. I want everybody to just want to chat about this before we wind things down here. This is the recent and current comments on CNN. You got Van Jones and others making comments. Now, there's one talking head on here, so to speak, that has a little bit of a decent perspective on what's going on, and he kind of pushes back on Anderson Cooper here. But take a look at their faces. You talk about not having a good day. I think this is pretty obvious and pretty straightforward.
Has finally released its ruling on this long case, saying that Trump has immunity from official acts. In several cases, they cite what official acts may be, but they also leave a number of others open for lower courts to make a final determination on. We're going to be talking a lot about the legal implications of all this. I want to first bring in CNN's Van Jones and Scott Jennings. Van, as you look at this, what stands out to you?
Well, it's a very concerning outcome. You know, there's a maxim that says in law, bad facts create bad law. So when you have somebody doing stuff that's so terrible, the stuff that Trump did in office, it creates these bad facts. The
only problem is this is not bad facts.
Right.
This is good facts of what bad things the Democrats have done to Donald Trump, but everybody sees it for what it is. And I think this Van Jones, if I'm not mistaken, if I am mistaken, put it in the comments so I know, but I believe this was the guy, or at least one of the guys that was the individuals that worked on President Obama's campaign. But at any rate, let's listen to him whine a second.
Court has to come in and figure out what to do about it. It often creates bad law. Basically, question the Supreme Court, do you more care about the unlawful conduct of a sitting president or possibly the unfair prosecution of a former president? That's really what they had to balance. They're obviously more concerned about the latter. And so I think politically, it's bad. It makes the Supreme Court look very partisan. They're supposed to be wearing these kind of black and white umpire jerseys or whatever. They look like they're wearing red jerseys or even MAGA hats. It's going to go down bad politically for the Supreme Court. But it's also scary because what is Trump going to do? If Trump gets elected and there's this idea that he can get away with even more stuff, that's really, really scary for the public because he already ran over every norm that he could. So it seems like, I'm just looking at this politically, not legally, politically, it's almost like a license to thug in a way. Like you can do whatever you want, and the Supreme Court is probably going to let you get away with it. That is very
I don't know if you heard that or not. He said it's like having a license to thug.
frightening. In this case, and so I'm very, very concerned.
Scott Jennings, Justice Sotomayor in her dissent essentially makes that argument, saying the main takeaway of today's decision is that all of a president's official acts defined without regard to motive or intent are entitled to immunity that is at least presumptive and quite possibly absolute.
Yeah, look, I think there's some amount of overreaction here. I mean, after all, they did kick it back down to the lower court, so some decisions could be made about differentiating between official and private acts. But look, this court has stood up for the office of the presidency and the executive power of the presidency in a way that, may be of some benefit to future presidents. I mean, we're looking at this through the lens of Donald Trump, but, the president of the United States has a lot of power for a reason. And they do take a lot of official actions. And I think about a future where, if it was open season on presidents for time immemorial, what action would any president ever take out of fear of being dragged into a courtroom every time they did it? So I hear Van, and I think there's interesting arguments on both sides of this today. I've listened to some of arguments like what Van has made, but at the same time, I do think the office deserves a lot of protection and a lot of deference because of the special place that it holds in our system. So I'm okay with it, especially because I think a lower court may have decisions to make in the future, of course, depending on the outcome of the election in November.
But Van, just to be clear, even if a lower court makes a ruling, then that can, because what the Supreme Court says is that can be appealed ultimately back to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, look, I think the Supreme Court is really hurting itself here. I mean, I think most Americans on either side would have preferred us getting some kind of finality around these.
Yeah, what he's basically saying is his feelings are hurt because they didn't get the ruling they want. So when they don't get the ruling they want, they turn around and they attack the Supreme Court. Unfortunate, but extremely predictable. So
the true Biden sycophant.
Exactly right. So we're going to start landing the plane right here. Sapphire, I want to thank you for joining us today. Do you want to say hello to the audience real quick and let them know how to reach you? I know you have a new YouTube channel you're starting, and would you like to go ahead and let them know how to contact you?
Yes. My name is Mark. I'm the founder of Sapphire Ridge News, and we talk about political events and comment on current events.
All right. Well, fantastic, my friend. I appreciate you being here today. If you would mind standing by, I appreciate it. And again, it's always good to have my friend Sapphire, a.k.a. Mark, on. And let me see if we got any comments. We'll make sure we answer any questions anybody might have right here. Let's see what we got. Zach, always appreciate you joining us today. Young man, say won't this decision be used and twisted by the mainstream media to say Trump committed? Yeah, of course they will. Of course they're going to continue that. Yeah, no one knows. Yeah, you don't know much about Joe. We've been talking about that a long time for our president. It is extremely disconcerting, to put it bluntly, exactly all the lies they've been talking about when it comes to President Biden. Obviously, I've been talking about it for quite some time now. They have no one to blame but themselves, folks. They have no one to blame but themselves. They're in a bind, and I'm talking about the Democrats. They're in a serious bind. They know Joe cannot be removed unless he wants to be removed. The process is very messy, very convoluted if they're going to try to force him out. And from what I understand, they simply can't do it. But they got no one to blame but themselves. The legacy media, MSNBC, CNN, they have told us for quite some time now, don't believe your lying eyes. You got a dog peeing on your leg, but not really. It's just rain. So they got no one to blame but themselves. They've been lying to us straight to our faces, and now they know they're in serious trouble. And what they're worried about is not just losing the presidential election. They're worried, rightly so, about losing people down ticket. It's really just that simple. They are very concerned about losing the House, losing the Senate, and in my estimation, they are right to be worried. All right. Hey, I appreciate everybody joining me today. It is always a pleasure when you take time to tune in, listen to what I have to say, so we can have some serious conversations about these very important subjects that affect us each and every day. I always say, keep that mind free. Never give up, my friends. And until next time, I am J.R. Dukes.